Hello and welcome to an Our Fake History digital short. Today we're going to find out if the Koreans invented ironclad warships 300 years before anyone else. Roll the theme. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Major and I'm the host of the Our Fake History podcast. That's the show where we explore historical myths and try and determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story that it simply must be told. Here on the digital shorts, I like to take something that we've been exploring on the longer audio podcasts and serve it in a more bite-sized video package. Recently on Our Fake History, we've been exploring the history of Korea and the massive 16th century conflict known to scholars as the Great East Asian War. That war between Japan, Korea, and the Ming Chinese is fairly obscure outside of Korea, where it's known as the Imjin War. But for Koreans, the Japanese invasion of their country in 1592 has been remembered as one of the most important conflicts in that nation's history. But much of Korean history was obscure to Western audiences until the late 19th century. It was only then that Europeans and Americans started writing about the Korean peninsula. Those early Western historians often presented Korea as a curious and backwards place. One 19th century American writer even dubbed it the Hermit Nation. But one bit of praise for Korean ingenuity that found its way into almost every history of Korea written for a Western audience had to do with a unique piece of naval technology that gained fame during the First Great East Asian War. Western historians never failed to mention the turtle ships, or Kobukseon, used to devastating effect by the Korean naval hero Admiral Yi Sunsin. Admiral Yi sometimes even gets credit for inventing this ship, but records show that the Kobukseon were originally designed over a century before Admiral Yi's birth. Instead, Admiral Yi revived the design and commissioned the building of new turtle ships on the eve of the Japanese invasion of 1592. The turtle ships were flat-bottom vessels that sat low in the water and were powered by both oars and sails. But what made them distinctive was that they were covered by a curved roof that looked like a turtle shell. All around the perimeter of that turtle shell were gun ports. This meant that the turtle ships could fire cannonballs and arrows at nearly 360 degrees. The bow of the ship had a distinctive dragon's head prow, whose mouth served as yet another gun port, out of which cannon and flamethrowers could be operated. These ships were fast when compared to the larger Japanese warships they were often pitted against. They had devastating firepower, and significantly, their turtle shell roofs were adorned with sharp iron spikes that made them dangerous to board. Not only did these vessels have a unique and beautiful design, the descriptions collected by the 19th century historians seem to suggest that the turtle ships may have been the world's first ironclad vessels. In the late 19th century, ironclad ships were at the front of mind for many Westerners, as they'd come into use in European and American navies only a few decades earlier. The battle between the ironclad warships the Monitor and the Virginia during the American Civil War had become one of the most celebrated naval engagements of that conflict. As such, Americans were especially curious about these Korean ironclads from 300 years previous. Cautious claims about the use of metal armor on the turtle ships soon evolved into statements of unambiguous fact. In 1882, historian William Griffiths described Admiral Yi's turtle ships as being, quote, apparently covered with metal, end quote. By 1892, another American historian, George Herbert Jones, explained that Admiral Yi was, quote, aided by his famous tortoise ship, a prototype of the Monitor of the American Rebellion. Jones believed that the turtle ships may have been proto-ironclads. But by 1905, Western historians were stating plainly that these ships had been ironclads. Full stop. In that year, Homer Hulbert wrote in his History of Korea that the turtle ship was covered with a, quote, curved deck of iron plates. It anticipated by nearly 300 years the ironclad warship, end quote. That claim was then repeated as fact for decades. After the end of the later Japanese occupation in 1945, Koreans, eager to reclaim their identity and celebrate their historical achievements, embraced the alleged historical first represented by the turtle ships. If Western historians were claiming that the turtle ships were the world's first ironclads, well, why contradict that idea? As the 20th century progressed, the Kobukseon took on an even greater symbolic resonance in South Korea. The turtle ships seemed to represent how the small country could punch above its weight thanks to the intelligence and innovative spirit of its people. As the Korean news magazine Gwonju News puts it, the turtle ships, quote, creation and use suggest that Korea can compensate for its small size through ingenuity, end quote. If you visit the Korean War Memorial in Seoul today, you will see a scale model of a turtle ship with a roof covered in hexagonal iron panels. But recent scholarship has suggested that while the turtle ships were remarkable, they may not have been covered in iron armor. References to iron defenses may have simply been referring to the iron spikes sticking out of the turtle ship's thick wooden roof. For example, take Admiral Yi's own descriptions of the ships. Yi wrote, quote, previously foreseeing the Japanese invasion, I had a turtle ship specifically built with a dragon's head, from whose mouth we could fire our cannons, and with iron spikes on its back to pierce the enemy's feet when they tried to board. Because it is in the shape of a turtle, our men can look out from the inside, but the enemy cannot look in from the outside. It moves swiftly, and it can plunge into the midst of even many hundreds of enemy vessels in any weather to attack them with cannonballs and fire throwers, end quote. Admiral Yi mentions iron spikes in that description, but not iron plating. The other detailed contemporary description of the turtle ship comes from Admiral Yi's nephew, Yi Pun. Yi Pun also did not mention metal armor. However, he did describe the metal spikes at length. His description also included that, quote, when engaging enemy vessels in battle, the upper decks were concealed with straw mats to conceal the spikes, end quote. Again, no iron plating was mentioned. Yi Pun tells us about a clever ruse that made the roofs of the ship look safe for boarding, while secretly concealing foot-impaling spikes. Finally, the Korean courtier and the author of the important war memoir, The Book of Corrections, Yi Sunsin, records that the turtle ships were, quote, covered by wooden planks on top, end quote. The author Samuel Hawley has also argued that 6 tons of iron would have been needed to cover the entire roof of a turtle ship. This would have been the same amount of iron needed for the entire complement of cannon on board one of these ships. He believes that it would have been difficult for Admiral Yi to acquire the necessary 6 tons of iron needed for one turtle ship roof, and then to use it for something other than guns. He also points out that Admiral Yi goes out of his way to mention a gift of 50 pounds of iron that he made to one of his comrades, but he says nothing in his diary of acquiring 6 tons of the metal. Hawley's point is that 6 tons of iron likely would have made Admiral Yi's diary. Further, iron plating would have been unnecessary on these ships. The Japanese ships of 1592 typically weren't equipped with large cannon. Instead, Japanese sailors fired handheld muskets or arquebuses and then tried to ram and board enemy vessels. As such, the turtle ships only needed to be able to resist Japanese musket fire, and thick timber was more than up to that task. So, it seems unlikely that the turtle ships were ironclad, beyond the iron spikes shooting out of their covered roofs. But just because they weren't ironclads doesn't mean they weren't cool. Honestly, I think they're pretty badass. To find out more about the turtle ships, Admiral Yi, and the Great East Asian War, then please check out the audio version of Our Fake History on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to get more wild stories from the past.